They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Well, after what I'm about to tell you, I can confirm it tastes even better when it's been marinating for 37 years. Before I begin, I want you to comment below and let me know where you're watching from, because what happened to me at that Christmas party could happen to any mother, anywhere in this world. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal from someone you trusted with your daughter's heart, if you've ever had your generosity thrown back in your face like yesterday's garbage, then please hit that subscribe button right now. Because this story, my story, is going to take you on a journey through heartbreak, manipulation, and the kind of revenge that changes everything. And make sure to check the description box below for more incredible stories like this one. My name is Eleanor, and I'm 68 years old now. But this story begins when I was 31, a young widow trying to rebuild my life after losing my husband Robert in a construction accident. I had nothing but a small life insurance payout, a broken heart, and a 6-year-old daughter named Sarah who was my entire world. The smell of fresh lumber and sawdust still takes me back to those early days. I used that insurance money, every single penny of it, to buy a small duplex in Riverside, Ohio. It wasn't much to look at, with its peeling white paint and a front porch that sagged like an old man's shoulders. But it was mine, and more importantly, it was going to be our future. The plan was simple: live in one half, rent out the other. The rental income would help us survive while I figured out how to be both mother and father to Sarah. I remember scrubbing those hardwood floors on my hands and knees, tears mixing with the Murphy's oil soap as I thought about Robert and how proud he would have been to see me fighting for our daughter's future. Sarah was everything to me. She had her father's dark curls and his stubborn chin, but she had my green eyes and my determination. Even at 6, she would sit cross-legged on the floor, organizing my screws and nails while I hung pictures and fixed loose cabinet doors. "Mommy," she'd say in that serious little voice, "when I grow up, I'm going to take care of you just like you take care of me." Those words. God, those words would echo in my mind for decades. The first tenants were the Hendersons, an elderly couple who paid their $400 rent like clockwork and brought us homemade cookies every Christmas. When they moved to Florida 5 years later, I raised the rent to $550. The duplex was in a good neighborhood now, the schools had improved, and young families were moving in. Property values were climbing. By the time Sarah turned 16, that little duplex had transformed. I'd put in new windows, updated the kitchen in both units, and landscaped the front yard myself. The rental income had grown to $800 a month, which meant I could afford to send Sarah to college when the time came. I worked double shifts at the hospital. I'd gotten my nursing degree when Sarah was 12, and every extra dollar went into repairs, improvements, or Sarah's college fund. I remember the night Sarah brought home her first real boyfriend. She was 17, a senior in high school, and glowing with first love. His name was David Thompson, and he was everything a mother worries about: too handsome, too smooth, too confident for his own good. He had dark hair that he was always running his fingers through and this way of looking at Sarah like she was the only person in the room. "Mom, this is David," Sarah said, practically vibrating with excitement. They were standing in my living room, and I could smell his cologne from across the room, something expensive that seemed at odds with his worn-out sneakers. David extended his hand with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mrs. Patterson, Sarah's told me so much about you. This is a beautiful home you have here." Even then, something about him set my teeth on edge. Maybe it was the way his eyes swept the room, cataloging everything like he was taking inventory. Maybe it was how he mentioned, twice in the first 10 minutes, that his family owned 3 restaurants downtown. Or maybe it was mother's intuition, that primitive warning system that tells you when someone isn't good for your child. But Sarah was radiant. She laughed at everything he said, tucked her hair behind her ears when he looked at her, and held his hand like she was afraid he might disappear. I'd never seen her so happy, and despite my reservations, I wanted that happiness for her. "David's applying to state too," Sarah announced over dinner. "Isn't that great? We might end up at the same school." I forced a smile and passed the mashed potatoes. "That's wonderful, honey." But inside, I was already dreading what I knew would come next. The tears, the heartbreak, the inevitable crash that follows teenage infatuation. I'd been 17 once too. I knew how these stories usually ended. If only I had known then that this particular story wouldn't end for 37 years, and when it finally did, it would explode across a Christmas dinner table like a bomb going off in slow motion. The summer before Sarah left for college was the happiest I'd ever seen her. She and David were inseparable, making plans for their future like they had it all figured out. She worked part-time at the local bookstore, saving money for school, while David worked at one of his family's restaurants. They would sit on my front porch in the evenings, her head on his shoulder, talking in low voices about their dreams. I remember one evening in particular, standing at my kitchen window washing dishes, watching them through the gauze of my curtains. The setting sun caught Sarah's hair, turning it copper gold, and David was tracing patterns on her palm while she giggled. They looked so young, so untouched by the world's cruelties. My heart ached with love for her and worry for what was coming. "They're good kids," my neighbor Mrs. Kowalski had said, joining me at the fence where I was watering my tomatoes. "That boy's got manners, I'll give him that. Always helps Sarah with the groceries." I nodded, but something in my chest remained tight. It wasn't that David was rude or disrespectful. He said please and thank you, complimented my cooking, and helped clear the table without being asked. But there was something performative about it all, like he was playing a role. And underneath the politeness, I sometimes caught glimpses of something else, a calculation, a coolness that worried me. The night before Sarah left for college, she came to me crying. They were sitting in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by packed boxes and suitcases, and David had just left after what looked like an intense conversation. "Mom," she sobbed into my shoulder, "what if we don't make it? What if college changes everything?" I held her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, the same strawberry scent she'd used since she was 12. "Baby, if it's meant to be, it'll work out. And if it doesn't, then maybe that means something even better is waiting for you." She pulled back to look at me with those green eyes, my eyes, red-rimmed and desperate. "But I love him, Mom. I can't imagine my life without him." My heart broke a little, remembering my own young love with Robert, remembering how completely and utterly we'd belonged to each other from the moment we met. But Robert had been different. Robert had been solid, honest, real in a way that David never seemed to be. "I know you do, sweetheart," I whispered, smoothing her hair. "Just promise me you won't lose yourself, okay? You're so young, and you have so much ahead of you." She promised, but even then, I could see she was already lost. College was supposed to be Sarah's fresh start, her chance to discover who she was beyond her small town and her first love. Instead, it became 4 years of watching my brilliant, independent daughter slowly disappear into someone I barely recognized. They both got into Ohio State, just like they'd planned. Sarah was majoring in education. She wanted to teach elementary school, just like her third-grade teacher Mrs. Williams, who had made such an impact on her after Robert died. David was studying business, with his eyes set on expanding his family's restaurant empire. On paper, they looked like the perfect college sweethearts. But the phone calls home told a different story. "David thinks I should switch my major," Sarah said during one of our weekly calls that first semester. I was folding laundry in my bedroom, the cordless phone tucked between my ear and shoulder, trying to keep the conversation light. "Oh? What does he think you should study instead?" "Communications. He says teaching doesn't pay enough, and if we're going to build a life together, I need to think practically." There was something defeated in her voice that made me set down the towel I was holding. "Sarah, honey, teaching was your dream since you were 10 years old. Remember how you used to line up all your stuffed animals and teach them math?" A pause. Then, quietly, "Dreams don't pay the bills, Mom. That's what David says." I wanted to reach through the phone and shake her. "Since when do you care about bills? You're 19 years old. This is the time to chase your dreams, not worry about practical considerations." "You don't understand," she said, and I could hear the edge creeping into her voice, the same edge that appeared whenever I questioned anything David said or did. "David's family has money. Real money. He knows about these things." After she hung up, I sat on my bed staring at the phone. This wasn't my daughter talking. My Sarah had never cared about money or status. She'd been raised to value kindness, education, and following your passion. But somehow, David was rewriting her value system, and she was letting him. The changes were subtle at first. Sarah had always called me twice a week, once on Tuesday evenings and once on Sunday mornings. But the calls became less frequent, more rushed. When I'd ask about her classes, she'd deflect to talk about David's latest business idea or his family's newest restaurant location. When I'd ask about her friends, she'd admit she didn't really have time for friendships anymore because she and David were always together. By sophomore year, she'd switched her major to communications, just like David suggested. By junior year, She was working part-time at one of his family's restaurants instead of the campus tutoring center where she'd originally planned to work. Every decision, every change, seemed to revolve around what David wanted or what would benefit their future together. I tried to voice my concerns during her visits home, but it was like talking to a stranger wearing my daughter's face. "Mom, you just don't understand what it's like to be part of a family with vision," she said during Thanksgiving of her junior year. We were peeling potatoes in my kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd done homework at my table for 12 years. But now she seemed uncomfortable here, like she'd outgrown her childhood home. "I understand plenty about family and vision," I said carefully. "I had plenty of vision when I bought this house and worked 3 jobs to make sure you could go to college debt-free." She sighed, the way people sigh when they're talking to someone they consider hopelessly naive. "That's different. David's family thinks big. They're opening 2 more locations next year, and they want me to help with marketing and social media. It's a real opportunity." "What about teaching? What about working with children?" "I can always do that later, after we're established." But I knew she wouldn't. I could see it in her eyes. Teaching had become something small and quaint in her mind, something for people who couldn't dream bigger. David had poisoned her against her own calling, and she didn't even realize it. The real breaking point came during Christmas of her senior year. Sarah had brought David home for the holidays, and I was determined to make an effort. I cooked his favorite meal, bought expensive wine, and bit my tongue when he made comments about my cozy little place that felt more condescending than complimentary. We were sitting around my dining room table, the same table where Sarah had done countless school projects, where we'd shared thousands of meals, where I'd held her while she cried over scraped knees and friendship drama. David was talking about his post-graduation plans, gesturing with his fork like he was giving a boardroom presentation. "The restaurant industry is all about location and expansion," he was saying. "My dad's been conservative, but I've got vision. Once Sarah and I are married, we're thinking about opening locations in Columbus, maybe even Cleveland." Married. It was the first I'd heard of any concrete plans, and from the look on Sarah's face, it was news to her too. "Married?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. David reached over and took Sarah's hand. "We haven't made it official yet, but yeah, we're planning on a spring wedding after graduation. Small ceremony, just family." Sarah was staring at him like she'd never seen him before. "David, we never talked about—" "I know we haven't set a date yet," he interrupted smoothly, "but why wait? We've been together 4 years. We know what we want." The presumption took my breath away. He was planning her future without even consulting her, announcing their engagement at my dinner table like it was already decided. And Sarah, my strong, independent Sarah, just sat there looking stunned. "That's quite an announcement," I managed. "Sarah's going to be perfect for the business side of things," David continued, completely missing the tension in the room. "She's got great people skills, and she understands the vision. Plus, my mother's been wanting to step back from managing the books. Sarah can take over that whole side of operations." I looked at my daughter, searching for some sign of the girl who used to dream of teaching children to read, who used to say she wanted to make a difference in kids' lives. But she just nodded along, her smile brittle and automatic. That night, after David had gone back to his parents' house, Sarah and I had our worst fight ever. "He's taking over your life," I said bluntly. "You're becoming someone I don't recognize." "That's not true," she shot back, but there were tears in her eyes. "I'm growing up, Mom. I'm thinking about the future." "Whose future? Because it doesn't sound like you have any say in what that future looks like. You're just jealous because I'm building something bigger than this." She gestured around my living room with obvious disdain. "I'm not going to end up alone in a duplex, working myself to death for nothing." The words hit me like a physical blow. Everything I'd sacrificed, every double shift I'd worked, every dollar I'd saved for her education, all of it dismissed as nothing. I felt the tears come and didn't try to stop them. "I worked myself to death so you could have choices," I whispered. "So you could become whoever you wanted to be, not whoever he wants you to be." She softened then, reaching for my hand. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean." "Yes, you did. And maybe that's the saddest part of all." She graduated that spring and married David 6 months later in a ceremony that felt more like a business merger than a celebration of love. I smiled and played the proud mother, but inside, I was mourning the death of my daughter's dreams and the birth of someone I barely knew. If you've ever watched someone you love disappear into a relationship that diminishes them, you know the helpless rage that consumed me during the early years of Sarah and David's marriage. It's like watching someone drown in slow motion while they insist they're just learning to swim. They moved into a small apartment downtown, close to the newest Thompson family restaurant where Sarah immediately started working full-time. David had big plans, big dreams, and apparently, big expenses that always seemed to exceed their income. The restaurant business, he'd explained during our increasingly rare family dinners, required constant reinvestment. Every profit had to go back into expansion, marketing, equipment upgrades. It's the nature of the beast, he'd say, cutting his steak with the authority of someone who'd read one too many business magazines. You've got to spend money to make money. Meanwhile, Sarah worked 60-hour weeks managing their books, handling social media, and filling in wherever they were short-staffed. She'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. When I'd ask her about it, she'd wave off my concerns. This is temporary, Mom. Once we get the third location off the ground, we'll be able to hire more help. But the third location led to a fourth, and the fourth led to talk of a fifth. There was always another expansion just around the corner, another opportunity that required Sarah to work harder, longer, for what seemed like increasingly less appreciation from her husband. It was during their second year of marriage that David first approached me about money. He came to my house on a Tuesday evening in November. I remember because I'd just finished my shift at the hospital and was looking forward to a quiet evening with a book and a cup of tea. The doorbell rang at 8:30, and there he was, standing on my front porch with that smile that had never quite convinced me. Eleanor, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I was wondering if we could talk. I let him in, offered coffee, and waited. David wasn't the type to make social calls. I'll cut right to the chase, he said, settling into my living room chair like he owned it. Sarah and I are looking at a property for our fifth location. It's perfect, right in the heart of downtown, tons of foot traffic. But we need to move fast. That sounds exciting, I said carefully. The thing is, we're a little short on the down payment. Banks are being tight with lending right now, and we need about $15,000 to make this work. He leaned forward, his voice taking on that persuasive tone I'd heard him use with suppliers and employees. I know you've got equity in this place, and I was thinking maybe you could help us out. It would be a loan, of course, with interest. Think of it as an investment in Sarah's future. $15,000. It was more than I made in 6 months at the hospital. It was money I'd earmarked for my own retirement, for the inevitable day when my body couldn't handle 12-hour shifts anymore. But he was talking about Sarah's future, and despite everything, I still wanted her to be happy. Let me think about it, I said. Of course, of course. Take your time. But Eleanor, this opportunity won't wait. If we don't move by Friday, someone else will snap it up. After he left, I sat in my quiet house and did what I'd always done when facing a big decision. I made a list. Pro, it would help Sarah's business. Con, it was my retirement money. Pro, David had said it was a loan with interest. Con, David said a lot of things. In the end, it was the memory of 6-year-old Sarah organizing my screws and nails that decided it. When I grow up, I'm going to take care of you just like you take care of me. Maybe this investment would secure her future enough that she could eventually take care of me like she'd promised. I took out a home equity loan and wrote them the check. The restaurant opened 6 months later to great fanfare. David made sure to mention my investment to everyone who would listen, but always as family support, never as a loan. When I brought it up to Sarah privately, she looked uncomfortable. Of course we're going to pay you back, Mom. David just wants to get the business stabilized first. You understand. But months turned into a year, and the subject of repayment never came up again. When I'd mention it to Sarah, she'd get defensive. When I'd mention it to David, he'd launch into complex explanations about cash flow and reinvestment that somehow always ended with why paying me back immediately would actually hurt their long-term success. Think of yourself as a silent partner, he said once, with that charming smile. You're building equity in our success. But I wasn't building equity. I was just watching my retirement fund disappear into their expanding empire while being made to feel guilty for caring about it. The second loan request came 2 years later. $25,000 this time, for renovations to their flagship location. David had the same urgency, the same persuasive arguments, the same assurances that this was an investment in Sarah's future. This time, I said no. David's charm evaporated like morning mist. I have to say, Eleanor, I'm disappointed. Sarah is your daughter. This business is her future, our children's future. I thought family meant something to you. Family does mean something to me. That's why I've already given you $15,000 that you've never mentioned paying back. Given? That was an investment. A loan. We've been paying you back in other ways, all the dinners we've bought you, all the times we've helped with repairs around here. I stared at him, speechless. 3 dinners at their restaurant and 1 afternoon of David half-heartedly helping me clean my gutters was not $15,000 in repayment. But somehow, in his mind, it was. After he left, Sarah called me crying. Mom, please. David's really hurt that you don't trust him. This renovation could make or break us. I'll personally guarantee the loan. I'll put it in writing. And because I was weak, because I loved her, because I still believed that somewhere inside the woman she'd become was the little girl who'd promised to take care of me, I said yes. I took out another home equity loan. Sarah did put it in writing, a simple IOU that we both signed. But somehow, that piece of paper made everything worse instead of better. Now it wasn't just about the money. It was about the fact that I'd asked for a guarantee at all. She doesn't trust us, I heard David telling Sarah when they thought I was out of earshot during a family barbecue. Her own daughter. After everything we've done for her. Everything they'd done for me. I'd given them $40,000 and gotten 3 restaurant meals in return. But in David's world, somehow I was the ungrateful one. The restaurant thrived. David bought a new BMW. Sarah got a diamond tennis bracelet for their anniversary. They took a 2-week vacation to Italy and posted photos of themselves dining in Rome while I worked double shifts to make my house payments. But when I brought up the loans, I was still the bad guy. Still the one who didn't understand business. Still the one who was being unreasonable for wanting my money back. By their 5th anniversary, I'd learned not to bring it up at all. It was easier to swallow my resentment than to deal with the guilt trips and the way Sarah would get quiet and distant for weeks afterward. I told myself that seeing her happy was worth more than the money. But late at night, lying in my bed in the house I might lose because of the equity loans, I wondered if she was actually happy at all. Or if she was just pretending, the way I was pretending that everything was fine. The call came at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday in September. Sarah's voice was breathless with excitement, and for a moment, she sounded like my little girl again. Mom, we're pregnant. Can you believe it? I'm going to be a mother. Joy flooded through me, washing away years of resentment and worry. A grandchild. My Sarah was going to have a baby. For the first time in years, I felt like we were truly connected again, sharing something that transcended all the tension that had built up between us. Oh, sweetheart, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. That's wonderful. How are you feeling? When are you due? April. And I feel scared and excited and overwhelmed. Mom, I keep thinking about all the things you taught me, all the ways you took care of me. I want to be that kind of mother. For 9 months, it was like having my daughter back. She called me constantly with questions about pregnancy, labor, baby gear. She wanted to hear stories about when she was little, wanted to know what I'd felt like when I was carrying her. David seemed genuinely excited too, and for the first time since they'd gotten married, I allowed myself to hope that this baby might bring out the best in both of them. Emma Rose Thompson was born on April 15th at 3:47 in the morning. 7 pounds, 2 ounces of pure perfection. When the nurse placed her in my arms for the first time, I fell completely, irrevocably in love. She had Sarah's eyes and that tiny cleft in her chin that ran in our family. She wrapped her impossibly small fingers around my thumb and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would do anything for this child. She's going to call you Grandma Ellie, Sarah said, exhausted but glowing in her hospital bed. Is that okay? It's perfect, I whispered, unable to look away from Emma's face. For the first few months, I was an integral part of Emma's life. I babysat 3 days a week so Sarah could work at the restaurant. I rocked Emma to sleep, fed her bottles, changed countless diapers, and fell more in love with her every day. This was what I'd been waiting for without knowing it, the chance to love someone with all my heart without the complications that had grown between Sarah and me. But as Emma got older and more independent, the old patterns reasserted themselves. Sarah was working longer hours than ever, trying to manage the books for all 5 restaurant locations. David was talking about franchising, about expanding into other cities. And somehow, despite their obvious success, they were always short on money when it came to things that mattered to Emma. "Mom, could you pick up some diapers on your way over tomorrow?" Sarah would ask. "We're running low and payday isn't until Friday." Or, "I know it's a lot to ask, but could you grab some of that special formula Emma likes? The regular stuff gives her gas." Small requests that seemed reasonable on their own. But they added up. Diapers, formula, clothes, toys, a crib when Emma outgrew her bassinet, a car seat, a high chair. I found myself furnishing an entire nursery's worth of supplies, and somehow I was never reimbursed. When I'd mention it, Sarah would look stricken. "Of course we'll pay you back, Mom. Things are just tight right now. The new location is taking more startup capital than we expected." But David's BMW was upgraded to a newer model. Sarah got a designer purse for her birthday. They joined the country club downtown. Money for luxuries seemed plentiful. Money for their daughter's necessities was always just out of reach. The breaking point came when Emma was 18 months old. She'd been staying with me while Sarah and David took a long weekend in Chicago, and when they returned, Emma had a fever and was clearly coming down with something. Sarah was panicking, wanting to take her to urgent care, but their insurance had lapsed. "We're between policies," David explained with that casual tone he used when discussing their financial irresponsibility. "The new plan kicks in next week." "Next week?" I stared at him in disbelief. "What if she needs medical attention now?" "She's fine," he said dismissively. "Kids get fevers all the time. It's probably just teething." But Emma wasn't fine. Her fever spiked to 103 degrees that night, and Sarah called me sobbing. The urgent care visit would cost $800 out of pocket, money they didn't have. I drove over with my checkbook at 11 o'clock at night. While we waited in the pediatric urgent care waiting room, Emma burning up in Sarah's arms, I realized this was who they'd become. Parents who would let their child suffer rather than admit they'd mismanaged their finances. Parents who expected me to cover the basics while they spent money on luxuries. Emma had an ear infection. $800 for antibiotics and peace of mind. I paid without complaint, but something hardened in my chest that night. This wasn't about helping family anymore. This was about subsidizing irresponsibility while they lived beyond their means. When Emma turned 2, I threw her a birthday party at my house. I bought the decorations, the cake, the presents. Sarah and David showed up with a single small gift and spent the party taking photos with Emma for their social media accounts, playing the role of devoted parents for their online audience. "Look at this amazing party Grandma Ellie threw for our princess." Sarah captioned one photo. The comments poured in, "What a wonderful grandmother. Emma is so lucky. Family is everything." But the bills were in my name. The time, effort, and money were mine. They were taking credit for my love while contributing nothing but their presence. That night, as I cleaned up wrapping paper and deflated balloons, I started a notebook. A record of every expense, every purchase, every dollar I'd spent on Emma's behalf. Not because I wanted to be reimbursed, I would have given her the world without expecting anything in return. But because I was starting to understand that David and Sarah saw my generosity as an entitlement, and Emma as a convenient reason to keep their hands in my wallet. The notebook filled up faster than I'd expected. Daycare costs when Sarah had to work late. Doctor visits when their insurance lapsed again. Clothes because Emma was growing so fast. Groceries for their house because Sarah was too busy to shop but somehow never too busy to ask me to pick things up. By Emma's 3rd birthday, I'd calculated that I was spending almost $1,000 a month on expenses that should have been her parents' responsibility. Meanwhile, David bought a boat. Sarah got a new wardrobe for her expanded role in the business. They were living like wealthy people while I funded their child's basic needs. "Mom, you spoil her too much," Sarah said one afternoon, watching me help Emma put together a puzzle I'd brought over. But she said it with a smile, like my spoiling was charming rather than concerning. "Someone has to," I replied without thinking. The comment hung in the air between us. Sarah's smile faded, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind, trying to decide if she should be offended. "We take care of our daughter just fine," she said finally. "I know you do, honey. I just meant, I love spending money on her. She's my only grandchild. But what I'd really meant was, someone has to buy her necessities since you won't." Someone has to make sure she has everything she needs since her parents are too busy playing successful business owners to actually budget for their child's expenses. That night, I sat in my kitchen with my notebook spread out in front of me. 3 years of expenses. Thousands of dollars. And for what? So David and Sarah could maintain their lifestyle while I subsidized their daughter's childhood? But when I looked at the photos on my refrigerator, Emma's first steps, her gap-toothed smile, her tiny hand holding mine, I knew I'd do it all over again. She was innocent in all this. She deserved the world, and if her parents wouldn't give it to her, I would. Even if it meant bankrupting myself in the process. If you've ever been in a relationship where you're constantly giving but somehow always made to feel like you're not doing enough, you'll understand what the next few years of my life felt like. It's emotional quicksand. The harder you try to please someone, the deeper you sink into their expectations. Emma was 4 when I first noticed how David talked about me in front of her. "Grandma Ellie loves to buy you things, doesn't she, Emma?" He'd say with that indulgent tone people use when discussing someone's harmless quirk. "She just can't help herself. You're her little princess." On the surface, it sounded affectionate. But underneath, there was something else, a subtle message that my generosity was excessive, compulsive, maybe even unhealthy. Like I was spoiling Emma because I had nothing better to do with my money, rather than because her parents consistently failed to budget for her needs. Sarah would chime in too, always with a laugh to soften the words. "Mom treats you better than she ever treated me, Em. You're the luckiest little girl in the world." It was said like a joke, but jokes have a way of carrying truth. And the truth Sarah was implanting in Emma's young mind was that Grandma Ellie's love was so excessive it was almost inappropriate. That my sacrifices were so over the top they were worth commenting on, worth making into family mythology. Meanwhile, David's mother, Patricia Thompson, was held up as the gold standard of grandmothering despite seeing Emma maybe once a month and never contributing anything beyond birthday and Christmas gifts. "Grandma Pat is so elegant," Sarah would say, showing Emma photos from Patricia's latest cruise or shopping trip. "Look at her beautiful jewelry. Isn't she sophisticated?" Patricia was sophisticated. She was also cold, critical, and completely uninvolved in Emma's day-to-day life. But somehow, her emotional distance was interpreted as class, while my hands-on involvement was seen as, what? Desperation? Overcompensation? The comparison became a constant undercurrent in our family dynamics. Patricia, who bought Emma one dress for her birthday, was praised for her thoughtful selection. I, who took Emma school shopping and bought her entire wardrobe for the year, was going overboard again. It was maddening, but it was also subtle enough that I questioned my own reactions. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe they were just making conversation. Maybe I was reading too much into innocent comments. But then came the incidents that were harder to explain away. Emma's 5th birthday fell on a Saturday. I'd offered to host the party at my house, like always, but Sarah said they wanted to have it at their place this year. "We want to start making our own traditions," she explained. I understood that. They were Emma's parents, of course they should host her parties. I offered to help with planning, decorating, catering, anything they needed. "That's sweet, Mom, but we've got it handled. We want to do this ourselves." The party was a disaster. Not because they didn't try, but because they'd fundamentally misunderstood what a 5-year-old's birthday party required. The cake was from an expensive bakery downtown, beautiful to look at but flavored with lavender and honey, sophisticated tastes that made Emma wrinkle her nose in confusion. The entertainment was a jazz quartet that played atmospheric music while 10 5-year-olds ran around looking for something to do. "Where are the games?" Emma asked me when I arrived, her voice small and disappointed. "Where's the bounce house?" "Maybe Mommy and Daddy have surprises planned," I said, but looking around their perfectly decorated living room, all white furniture and expensive art, I could see this party was designed more for Instagram than for children. The other parents stood around making polite conversation while their kids grew increasingly restless. By the time Emma started crying because she wanted to play musical chairs but there was nowhere to clear space for it, I was ready to intervene. "I could run home and get some party games," I offered quietly to Sarah. "No, Mom. We're fine. Emma just needs to learn that not every party has to be excessive." Excessive. There was that word again. Somehow, wanting a 5-year-old's party to actually entertain 5-year-olds was excessive. I watched my granddaughter's disappointment with a breaking heart, but I kept quiet. This was their party, their choice, their lesson to learn. But when Emma came to me afterward and whispered, "I like my parties at your house better, Grandma Ellie," I felt both vindicated and heartbroken. The manipulation became more obvious as Emma got older and more perceptive. David and Sarah developed a pattern of building up my contributions in front of her, then subtly tearing them down when she wasn't listening. "Grandma Ellie bought you those beautiful school supplies," Sarah would say to Emma. "Isn't she generous?" Then, to me, when Emma was in the other room, "Mom, you really don't need to buy her everything. She needs to learn the value of money." But when it came time for school supply shopping, somehow Sarah never had the time or the budget to take Emma herself. When Emma needed a new winter coat, they were always between paychecks. When Emma wanted to take dance classes, it was my checkbook that made it possible. I was simultaneously too generous and not generous enough, too involved and not supportive enough. Every contribution was both praised and criticized, wanted and resented. The breaking point came when Emma was 7. She'd been accepted into a gifted program at school, but it required a laptop for their advanced coursework. The school sent home a list of required specifications, nothing fancy, but a decent machine that would last through elementary school. "We'll figure something out," Sarah said when I congratulated her on Emma's acceptance. "Maybe we can find something used." A used laptop for my brilliant granddaughter's gifted program? While David drove a BMW that cost more than I made in a year, I bit my tongue for exactly one day before offering to buy Emma the laptop she needed. "That's incredibly generous, Mom, but we can handle our daughter's school needs." "Of course you can. I just thought." "You thought we couldn't afford it?" There was no good answer to that question. If I said yes, I was insulting their financial management. If I said no, then why was I offering? I thought I'd like to contribute to Emma's education. She's my granddaughter, and I'm proud of her achievements. Sarah's face softened slightly. "I know, and we appreciate everything you do. But David and I discussed it, and we want to provide this for Emma ourselves. It's important to us as her parents." I respected that decision, even though it worried me. But 3 weeks later, Emma still didn't have a laptop, and she was falling behind in her coursework. When I picked her up from school, her teacher pulled me aside. "Emma's having trouble keeping up with some of the computer-based assignments. I know she's bright enough for this program, but she needs the proper tools at home." That evening, I called Sarah. "Has Emma gotten her laptop yet?" A pause. "We're still looking at options." "Sarah, she's falling behind. Her teacher is concerned." "We're handling it, Mom." But they weren't handling it. They were letting Emma struggle and fall behind rather than admit they'd made a promise they couldn't keep. Meanwhile, I was watching my granddaughter's confidence erode as she failed to complete assignments that required equipment her parents couldn't or wouldn't provide. I bought the laptop that weekend. I drove to Emma's school on Monday and gave it directly to her teacher, asking that it be presented to Emma as a school loaner so her parents wouldn't know where it came from. When Emma came home that day, excited about her borrowed computer, Sarah called me immediately. "Did you buy Emma a laptop after I specifically asked you not to?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Mom. This is exactly the kind of manipulation I'm talking about. You went behind our backs because you didn't respect our decision as Emma's parents." Manipulation. The word hit me like a slap. I'd sacrificed my own financial security for years to ensure Emma had everything she needed, and now I was being accused of manipulation because I'd helped her when her parents wouldn't. I wanted her to succeed in her program. At the cost of undermining us. "Do you realize what you've done? You've taught Emma that when Mommy and Daddy say no, she can count on Grandma to say yes. You've made us look like the bad guys in our own daughter's life." The accusation was so unfair, so twisted from reality, that I couldn't respond. I hadn't taught Emma to come to me when her parents said no. I'd watched her struggle and stepped in to help. But somehow, in Sarah's mind, my love for Emma had become a betrayal of her authority. "I never meant." "I know you never mean to hurt us, Mom. But impact matters more than intent. David and I have discussed this, and we think it might be better if you step back a little. Let us parent our daughter without constant assistance." The conversation ended with me feeling like the villain in my own granddaughter's story. I'd spent 7 years making sure Emma had everything she needed, and now I was being punished for caring too much. That night, I sat in my kitchen with my notebook, now 3 volumes thick, and tried to make sense of what had happened to my family. How had my love become manipulation? How had my generosity become interference? How had wanting the best for Emma made me the problem? But as I flipped through pages of receipts and expenses, a different picture began to emerge. This wasn't about Emma at all. This was about control, about making sure I stayed in my place as the grateful grandmother who gave without expecting gratitude, who contributed without expecting recognition. David and Sarah had built their lifestyle on my generosity, but they resented needing me. So they'd found a way to make my contributions feel like character flaws instead of sacrifices. They'd reframed my love as unhealthy so they could accept my money without feeling guilty. I was their silent partner in more ways than one, silent about the loans they'd never repaid, silent about the expenses they'd never reimbursed, and now expected to be silent about the role I played in Emma's life. But silence, I was beginning to realize, was just another word for complicity. The subtle banishment from Emma's life started immediately after the laptop incident. It wasn't dramatic or obvious, David and Sarah were too smart for that. Instead, it was death by 1,000 small cuts, each one plausibly innocent on its own. Emma's got so much homework this week, Mom. Maybe skip your usual Tuesday visit. The dance recital is just for immediate family. You understand. Emma's having a sleepover with friends from school. We want her to focus on building those relationships. Each excuse was reasonable. Each decision could be justified. But taken together, they formed a clear pattern. I was being systematically removed from the daily rhythm of Emma's life. The worst part was watching Emma's confusion. She'd been spending 3 days a week at my house since she was a baby. Suddenly, those visits became irregular, then rare, then almost non-existent. When she'd ask to come over, Sarah would redirect her attention to something else. Grandma Ellie's really busy with work right now, sweetheart. Why don't we go get ice cream instead? But I wasn't busy with work. I was sitting in my empty house, waiting for phone calls that came less and less frequently, missing the sound of Emma's laughter echoing through rooms that had become too quiet. When I did see Emma, she seemed different. More reserved around me, like she'd been coached on appropriate boundaries. She still hugged me, but the embraces were shorter. She still told me about school, but her stories were more careful, edited for content I wasn't supposed to know. Mommy said I shouldn't ask you to buy me things anymore, she told me one afternoon when I offered to take her shopping for a new backpack. She was 8 years old, trying to navigate adult politics she couldn't possibly understand. Did Mommy say why? She said it makes you feel bad when you spend too much money. She said I should be more considerate. The manipulation was breathtaking. They turned my generosity into something Emma needed to protect me from. Now, instead of feeling loved and spoiled by her grandmother, she felt guilty for accepting anything from me. You never make me feel bad, Emma. Taking care of you makes me happy. But Daddy said. What did Daddy say? She looked uncomfortable, torn between loyalty to her parents and her natural honesty. He said sometimes grown-ups do things because they feel guilty, not because they want to. And that's not fair to the people they're trying to help. Guilt. They'd reduced years of love, sacrifice, and genuine joy in Emma's happiness to guilt. In their narrative, I wasn't a grandmother who adored her granddaughter. I was a lonely woman trying to buy affection because I felt bad about something. The isolation extended beyond just Emma. David and Sarah stopped inviting me to family gatherings unless they were obligated to do so. Birthdays, holidays, special occasions. I became the afterthought, the plus one to my own daughter's life. When Emma turned 9, I wasn't invited to the planning meeting for her party. I found out about the theme, location, and guest list the same way Emma's school friends did, through the Facebook invitation Sarah posted publicly. We wanted to surprise you too, Mom, Sarah explained when I asked why I hadn't been included in the planning. You always take charge of everything. We thought it would be nice for you to just show up and enjoy yourself. But I didn't enjoy myself. I sat at a table with parents I barely knew, watching my granddaughter celebrate with a cake I hadn't baked, surrounded by decorations I hadn't hung, playing games I hadn't organized. For 8 years, I'd been the architect of Emma's happiness. Now I was just a spectator. The financial expectations, however, remained unchanged. Mom, Emma's piano teacher says she's really talented, Sarah called to tell me one evening. She thinks Emma should start taking lessons from someone more advanced. There's this woman downtown who's supposed to be amazing. I waited for Sarah to mention cost, to ask for help, to acknowledge what we both knew was coming. but she'd gotten more sophisticated in her requests over the years. That's wonderful. Emma loves music. The only thing is, this teacher is pretty expensive. $200 a month, plus we'd need to rent a better piano for Emma to practice on. A pause. The expectation hanging between us like a spider's web. Well, if Emma's talented, you should definitely pursue it. Yeah. I mean, we want to. It's just timing, you know? With the new restaurant location opening and everything. There was always a new restaurant location. Always a reason why their money was tied up in business investments while Emma's enrichment activities required my funding. How much would the piano rental be? Maybe $150 a month. But Mom, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Emma's teacher says she has real potential. $350 a month. Over $4,000 a year. 4 piano lessons and rental that would be another line item in my notebook, another expense I'd be expected to cover while being simultaneously criticized for my excessive generosity. But it was for Emma. And despite everything, the manipulation, the isolation, the twisted narrative they'd created about my motives, I still loved that little girl more than my own life. I'll take care of it. Really? Mom, you're the best. Emma's going to be so excited. We'll make sure she knows this is coming from you. But when I saw Emma the following week, she didn't mention the piano lessons. When I brought them up, she looked surprised. Oh, those. Yeah, Mommy and Daddy said they saved up to pay for them. They're really proud that they could afford it without help. They'd taken credit for my gift. Again. Not only was I funding Emma's opportunities, but I was being erased from her understanding of who was making those opportunities possible. That night, I called Sarah. Emma doesn't know the piano lessons are coming from me. Mom, we talked about this. We don't want her to think she can only have nice things if you pay for them. We want her to see us as providers. But you're not providing. I am. The words hung in the air between us. It was the most direct I'd ever been about the fundamental dishonesty at the heart of our relationship. That's not, look, we appreciate your help. You know we do. But Emma needs to see her parents as capable. It's important for her sense of security. What about my sense of security? I'm depleting my retirement savings to fund your daughter's childhood, and you won't even let her know where her opportunities are coming from. Nobody asked you to do that, Mom. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Nobody asked me. They'd been asking me for 9 years, directly and indirectly. Every financial crisis, every opportunity for Emma, every expense they couldn't or wouldn't cover, they'd made it my responsibility while pretending it was my choice. You're right, I said quietly. Nobody asked me. I did it because I love Emma and I love you. But apparently, that love is inconvenient for the story you want to tell about your life. I hung up before Sarah could respond. That night, I made a decision that had been building for months. I was done being the silent benefactor of their lifestyle. If they wanted to erase my contributions from Emma's understanding, they could start making those contributions themselves. But breaking that cycle, I would soon discover, was much harder than I'd anticipated. Because David and Sarah had built their entire financial structure on my reliability, and when I threatened that foundation, they weren't going to let me walk away quietly. The war for Emma's future was about to begin in earnest. When someone has been using your generosity as their financial safety net for almost a decade, they don't respond well to boundaries. David and Sarah's reaction to my newfound reluctance was swift, calculated, and designed to make me feel like the worst grandmother in the world. It started with Emma herself. Suddenly, my 9-year-old granddaughter was calling me with requests that sounded suspiciously coached. Grandma Ellie, my friend Jessica has the new iPhone and she says I need one too for our class project. Mommy said to ask you because you know about technology. I'd never expressed any particular knowledge about technology. This was clearly Sarah putting words in Emma's mouth, using her as a messenger to avoid asking me directly. What kind of class project requires an iPhone, sweetheart? A video project? For social studies. The hesitation in her voice told me she wasn't entirely sure herself. But the expectation was clear. Grandma Ellie would say yes, because Grandma Ellie always said yes. Let me talk to your mommy about what you actually need for this project. When I called Sarah, she was defensive immediately. Emma came to you herself, Mom. I didn't ask her to. She's 9 years old, Sarah. 9-year-olds don't independently decide they need $1,000 phones for school projects. Fine. The teacher mentioned that video projects work better with newer devices. Emma's been embarrassed because her tablet is so old compared to what the other kids have. And there it was, the emotional manipulation wrapped in parental concern. Now it wasn't about Emma needing a phone. It was about Emma being embarrassed, being excluded, being less than because her grandmother wasn't keeping up with the technology her classmates had. If Emma needs a device for school, you and David should provide it. A long pause. Wow. Okay. I guess I misunderstood what kind of grandmother you wanted to be. What kind of grandmother I wanted to be. Like my worth was measured entirely by my willingness to fund their requests without question. The emotional blackmail escalated over the following weeks. Emma would mention, casually, that she was the only kid in her dance class without proper shoes. Sarah would sigh about how they'd love to sign Emma up for summer camp but just couldn't swing the cost this year. David would make comments about how some grandparents really went all out for their grandchildren while others were more selective. But the most effective manipulation was the gradual erosion of my access to Emma herself. Emma's got a big test next week, so she won't be able to visit this weekend. Emma's really focused on her school friends right now. The therapist says it's important for her to build independence from family. Therapist? Since when was Emma seeing a therapist? What therapist? Is something wrong? Nothing's wrong, Mom. It's just preventive. We want to make sure Emma has healthy relationship patterns as she gets older. The implication was clear. My relationship with Emma was unhealthy and needed professional intervention. They'd found a way to pathologize my love, to make my devotion to Emma seem obsessive and damaging. What kind of relationship patterns is she learning about? Boundaries, mostly. Age-appropriate expectations. The difference between love and dependency. I felt sick. They were teaching my granddaughter that my love was dependency, that my generosity was unhealthy, that maintaining distance from me was a sign of maturity. When I did see Emma, she seemed different. More careful around me, more aware of some invisible line she wasn't supposed to cross. She'd catch herself mid-sentence sometimes, as if remembering something she'd been told about what she could or couldn't share with me. Did you have fun at Grandma Pat's last weekend? I asked during one of our increasingly rare visits. Emma's face lit up immediately. Oh yeah. She took me shopping and we got manicures and she bought me this really pretty dress for picture day. She said I looked sophisticated. Patricia, who saw Emma once a month and contributed maybe $2,000 a year to her life, was celebrated for a single shopping trip. Meanwhile, I was being treated like a harmful influence for years of daily involvement. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Grandma Pat said she's going to take me on a vacation this summer. Just me and her, to this fancy resort she knows. She said it would be good for me to see how elegant ladies behave. The contrast was stark and deliberate. Patricia's sporadic, expensive gestures were framed as sophisticated and enriching. My consistent, practical support was portrayed as excessive and problematic. The final blow came when Emma turned 10. I wasn't invited to her birthday party at all. We're keeping it small this year, Sarah explained when I called to ask about plans. Just immediate family and a few school friends. I am immediate family. You know what I mean. David's parents will be there, obviously, since they're helping to pay for the party. Helping to pay for the party. Patricia and Richard Thompson, who lived in their expensive suburb and saw Emma sporadically, were helping to pay for one party. I, who had funded Emma's entire childhood, was excluded because I'd started asking questions about where my money was going. I'd like to see Emma on her birthday. Of course. Maybe you could take her out for a special grandmother-granddaughter dinner the week after? Something just for the two of you. I was being relegated to consolation prize status. The birthday party, the main event, the memory-making celebration, belonged to the grandparents who contributed financially to this specific occasion. I got the leftover time, the afterthought dinner, the secondary celebration. But what hurt most wasn't the exclusion from the party. It was the realization that Emma, now 10 years old, was learning to see this arrangement as normal. She was being taught that Grandma Ellie got the scraps while Grandma Pat got the spotlight, and that this hierarchy was natural and appropriate. The dinner, when it finally happened, felt stilted and strange. Emma was polite but distant, like she was having dinner with an acquaintance rather than the grandmother who'd been the most consistent presence in her life. Tell me about your party, I said, trying to bridge the gap that had grown between us. It was nice. Grandma Pat gave a toast about how important it is for young ladies to have proper role models. She's really smart about etiquette and stuff. What kind of etiquette? Like how to sit properly and which fork to use and how to make conversation with adults. She says these things matter when you want to make a good impression. I thought about all the afternoons Emma had spent in my kitchen, helping me cook, learning practical skills, talking about everything from school problems to her dreams for the future. But apparently, those conversations weren't the right kind of adult interaction. They were just, what? Casual chatter with the grandmother who was too familiar, too accessible. Did you have fun, though? At the party? Yeah. I mean, it was different from my other parties. More grown up. Grandma Pat said I'm getting to an age where I need to start thinking about my reputation and how I want people to see me. 10 years old, and Patricia was already coaching Emma on reputation management. While I'd been teaching Emma to be kind, curious, and authentic, Patricia was teaching her to be calculating, image-conscious, and strategic about relationships. When I drove Emma home that night, she thanked me for dinner with the same polite tone she might use with a family friend. The easy intimacy we'd always shared felt forced and artificial, like she was performing the role of grateful granddaughter rather than actually feeling it. As I watched her walk into her house, the house where I'd paid for countless repairs, renovations, and necessities, I realized that David and Sarah had successfully rewritten the story of Emma's childhood. In the new narrative, they were the providers, Patricia was the role model, and I was the excessive grandmother who needed to be managed and contained. But they'd made one crucial mistake in their campaign to diminish my influence. They'd gotten lazy about covering their financial tracks. And after 10 years of keeping meticulous records, I was about to discover just how extensive their deception had actually been. By the time Emma turned 11, I'd been relegated to the role of occasional visitor in my own granddaughter's life. The child who'd once called me 3 times a week now saw me maybe twice a month, always under Sarah and David's watchful supervision. I felt like a stranger being gradually written out of my own family story. But if you've stayed with me this far in my story, you know that sometimes the most devastating revelations come when you least expect them. Sometimes, the truth has been hiding in plain sight, waiting for exactly the right moment to destroy everything you thought you knew about your life. That moment came on a cold December afternoon, 3 weeks before Christmas. I was cleaning out my filing cabinets, organizing tax documents for the year, when I came across a folder I'd forgotten about. It was labeled Thompson Restaurant Insurance, paperwork David had asked me to hold on to years ago when they were switching insurance companies. Inside the folder were documents I'd never really looked at closely: business insurance policies, liability coverage, property documentation. Standard paperwork that had meant nothing to me at the time. But now, with years of financial suspicion behind me, I started reading more carefully. What I found in those documents changed everything. The property deed for their flagship restaurant location was in my name. I stared at the document, reading it 3 times before the words sank in. The restaurant I'd been told I was investing in, the property that justified David's first request for $15,000, was actually titled to me. I owned it. Had owned it for 7 years without knowing it. My hands shaking, I dug deeper into the paperwork. More property deeds. More ownership documents. The second location, the third, all titled to Eleanor Patterson. All legally mine, though I'd been paying property taxes on businesses I didn't even know I owned. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope. When David had come to me 7 years ago asking for investment money, he hadn't been asking for a loan at all. He'd been asking me to purchase properties that would then house his restaurants, with him as the operator and me as the unknowing owner. But why? Why go through such elaborate deception when a simple business loan would have accomplished the same thing? The answer was in the insurance documentation. As the property owner, I was liable for everything that happened on those premises. Every slip and fall lawsuit, every kitchen fire, every health department violation. Legally, it was my responsibility. David and Sarah got all the profits from successful restaurants while I unknowingly carried all the legal and financial risk. I spent the next 3 days going through every document in that folder, cross-referencing it with my own records, trying to understand the full extent of what had been done to me. What I discovered was a systematic fraud that had been operating under my nose for almost a decade. I didn't just own the restaurant properties. I owned the equipment leases, the business licenses, even the trademark on the Thompson family restaurant logo. On paper, I was the sole proprietor of a restaurant empire worth over $2 million. In reality, I was an unwitting front for David's business operations, legally responsible for everything while receiving none of the profits. The rental income from my duplex, which I'd been using to make my house payments after taking out equity loans for their investments, was actually my own money. I was paying myself rent on properties I owned, while David and Sarah pocketed the restaurant profits and lived like successful entrepreneurs. But the cruelest discovery was yet to come. Hidden in the back of the folder was a handwritten note from David to his father, dated 3 years earlier. "Dad, the old lady is totally clueless about the property ownership setup. As long as we keep her thinking she's just a generous grandmother helping out, we can keep this arrangement going indefinitely. Sarah feels bad sometimes, but she understands it's necessary for Emma's future. The kid deserves better than what Eleanor can provide on her nurse's salary. This way, everyone wins, he gets to feel important, we get to build wealth, and Emma gets the life she deserves. Just make sure Mom never sees the real books. Everyone wins." That's how David saw it. I got to feel important while unknowingly funding their entire lifestyle. They got to build wealth on my legal liability and financial risk. Emma got material advantages while being taught to see me as excessive and inappropriate. The only person who didn't win was me. The woman who'd actually earned the money, taken the risks, and made the sacrifices that built their comfortable life. I sat in my kitchen that night, surrounded by evidence of a fraud so comprehensive it took my breath away. Every family dinner where they discussed their business success. Every time David had explained why they couldn't pay me back because profits were being reinvested. Every time Sarah had made me feel guilty for asking about loan repayment. All of it had been lies, designed to keep me compliant while they built their empire on my ignorance. The note mentioned the real books, financial records I'd never seen. If I owned these businesses, I had a right to see their financial statements. I had a right to know how much money was being made from properties I'd unknowingly purchased. But more than that, I had a right to the truth. And after 10 years of manipulation, gaslighting, and systematic emotional abuse disguised as family dynamics, I was finally going to demand it. I called a lawyer the next morning. Then I called an accountant. Within a week, I had a clear picture of what had been stolen from me, and it was worse than I'd imagined. The restaurant empire I unknowingly owned was generating over $300,000 in annual profit. Money that should have been mine was funding David and Sarah's luxury lifestyle while I worked double shifts at the hospital to make ends meet. The equity loans I'd taken out on my house, loans that had put my retirement security at risk, had been used to purchase assets that were making them rich while keeping me poor. They'd stolen more than money. They'd stolen years of my life, relationships with my granddaughter, and my understanding of my own worth within my family. But what they didn't know was that I still had 2 weeks until Christmas. 2 weeks to plan my response to a decade of systematic betrayal. 2 weeks to decide how much truth a family Christmas dinner could handle. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, you know the cold clarity that comes with absolute proof of their deception. It's not hot anger, that comes later. It's ice-cold recognition of exactly who someone really is, and exactly what you need to do about it. I was 65 years old, and I just discovered that my daughter and son-in-law had spent the last decade systematically defrauding me while making me feel grateful for the privilege. They'd used my love for Emma as emotional leverage to steal my financial security, then convinced me that my generosity was a character flaw that needed to be managed. But they'd made one crucial error in their long con. They'd left me in possession of the very documents that proved their fraud. And now, with 2 weeks until Christmas, I had time to plan the perfect gift for the family who'd been taking everything from me for years. The gift of truth. Served ice-cold at their own dinner table, in front of their children, with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. Christmas dinner was going to be very interesting this year. The call came on December 20th, 5 days before Christmas. Sarah's voice had that false brightness she used when she was asking for something she knew I wouldn't want to give. "Mom, I know this is last minute, but would you be willing to host Christmas dinner this year? David's parents are coming, and our dining room is just too small for everyone. Plus, you know how much Emma loves your Christmas decorations." After everything I'd discovered, the audacity was breathtaking. They wanted to use my house for their family gathering while continuing to marginalize me within my own family. But this time, their presumption was going to work in my favor. "Of course," I said sweetly. "I'd love to host. How many people should I plan for?" "Let's see, me and David, Emma, David's parents, and you. So 6 adults and Emma. You're an angel, Mom. I'll bring the wine. I spent the next 5 days preparing for the most important dinner party of my life. I cooked Emma's favorite dishes, decorated the house beautifully, and set the dining room table with my best china. To anyone watching, I looked like the devoted grandmother and mother, excited to host her family for Christmas. But tucked into my purse was a folder containing copies of every document I discovered, along with printouts of financial statements my lawyer had obtained through legal channels. I also had a small recording device. I wanted documentation of whatever was about to unfold. Patricia and Richard Thompson arrived first, elegant as always in their expensive coats and perfectly coordinated outfits. Patricia air-kissed my cheeks and complimented my decorations with the kind of faint praise that managed to sound generous and condescending at the same time. Eleanor, how festive. You've certainly gone all out this year. I wanted everything to be perfect, I replied, and I meant it. This dinner needed to be perfect, because it would be the last family gathering we'd ever have together. Emma burst through the door next, taller now at 11, her face bright with genuine excitement at seeing my Christmas decorations. For a moment, looking at her joy, I almost wavered in my resolve. But then David walked in behind her, surveying my dining room with that proprietary air that had always irritated me, and my determination solidified. Eleanor, this looks fantastic, he said, giving me one of his calculated smiles. You really outdid yourself this year. Sarah arrived carrying 2 bottles of expensive wine I now knew was being purchased with profits from businesses I unknowingly owned. She looked tired, and I wondered if the stress of maintaining their elaborate deception was finally wearing on her. We made small talk during cocktails, the same comfortable family banter we'd engaged in for years. David discussed the restaurant's busy holiday season, and Patricia talked about their recent vacation to Europe. Emma showed me her latest school project, and I listened with the same absorbed attention I'd always given her interests. But underneath the normalcy, I was studying each of them with new eyes. David's casual confidence, built on years of successful manipulation. Patricia's subtle superiority, enhanced by her ignorance of how her family's wealth was actually generated. Sarah's careful monitoring of every conversation, always ready to redirect if topics got too close to dangerous territory. And Emma, innocent and trusting, caught in the middle of adult deceptions she couldn't possibly understand. We sat down to dinner at 6 o'clock. I'd placed myself at the head of the table, my table, in my house, purchased with my money, with Emma to my right and Patricia to my left. David and Sarah sat across from each other in the middle, with Richard at the foot of the table. The meal started pleasantly enough. Everyone complimented the food, Emma chatted about school, and Patricia told stories about David's childhood Christmases. But I was waiting for the right moment, the perfect opening for what needed to be said. It came during dessert, when Patricia made one of her typical comments about the importance of teaching children proper values. Emma, darling, she said, cutting into her slice of pie with surgical precision, I hope you're learning to appreciate how hard your parents work to provide such a lovely life for you. Not every child is as fortunate as you are. I know, Grandma Pat, Emma said dutifully. Mommy and Daddy work really hard at the restaurants. They certainly do, Patricia continued, warming to her theme. Building a successful business empire from the ground up takes real vision and sacrifice. They've done remarkably well for themselves. This was my opening. I set down my fork carefully, taking a moment to center myself for what was about to happen. They have done well, I agreed quietly. Though I think the story of how that empire was built is more complicated than most people realize. Something in my tone made Sarah's head snap up. I saw recognition flash across her face. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't know what. Mom, she said quickly, with a warning in her voice, let's not bore everyone with business talk over dessert. Oh, I think Patricia's right that Emma should understand how her parents built their success, I continued, my voice still calm. Transparency is important in families, don't you think? David shifted in his seat, exchanging a quick glance with Sarah. Eleanor, this isn't really the time. When is the time, David? I've been waiting 10 years for the right time to discuss this. I think Christmas dinner, surrounded by family, is perfect. The temperature in the room dropped perceptibly. Emma was looking between us with confusion, sensing the adult tension but not understanding its source. Discuss what? Patricia asked, her elegant eyebrows rising. I pulled the folder from under my seat and placed it on the table. I think we should discuss who actually owns the Thompson restaurant empire, and how that ownership came to be. Sarah's face went white. David's jaw clenched. Richard leaned forward with sudden interest. I don't understand, Patricia said, looking to David for explanation. Neither did I said, opening the folder and pulling out the property deeds. Not until 3 weeks ago, when I accidentally discovered that I am the legal owner of every restaurant location bearing the Thompson family name. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Emma stopped eating, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. That's not, David started, but I cut him off. Possible? Except it is. Would you like to see the documents? I slid the deeds across the table to Richard, who picked them up with shaking hands. Every property, every business license, every equipment lease. All in my name. Eleanor Patterson, sole proprietor. This must be some kind of bookkeeping error, Patricia said, but her voice had lost its confident edge. That's what I thought at first, I replied. But then I found this. I pulled out David's note to his father. Your son's own handwriting, explaining how keeping me clueless about the property ownership was necessary for their financial success. I read the note aloud, every cruel word. The old lady is totally clueless. Sarah feels bad sometimes, but she understands it's necessary for Emma's future. Everyone wins. Emma's face crumpled. Grandma Ellie. It's okay, sweetheart, I said gently, though my heart was breaking at her distress. This isn't about you. This is about your parents lying to me for 10 years about where my money was going. We didn't lie, Sarah said desperately, tears streaming down her face. We just structured things for tax purposes. You were always going to be paid back. Paid back. My voice rose despite my attempts to stay calm. Paid back for what, Sarah? For buying properties that I didn't know I owned? For carrying all the legal liability while you collected all the profits? For working double shifts to make mortgage payments on my house while you vacationed in Italy and bought luxury cars? You offered to help us, David said, and there was anger in his voice now. You wanted to invest in our future. I wanted to loan you money for a business startup. Not purchase properties that would be titled to me while you lived like millionaires off the profits. Richard was still reading through the documents, his expression growing darker with each page. Patricia looked like she might faint. David, Richard said slowly, tell me she's wrong. Tell me you didn't do this to your wife's mother. It was a legitimate business structure, David insisted, but he wouldn't meet his father's eyes. Eleanor gets all the tax advantages of property ownership. And all the liability, I interrupted. Every lawsuit, every health department violation, every business debt. All legally mine while you walk away with the profits. My lawyer estimates you've made over $3 million in profit from these businesses over the past 7 years. $3 million from properties I unknowingly purchased. The number hung in the air like a bomb. Even Emma, at 11 years old, understood what $3 million meant. But that's stealing, Emma whispered. No, sweetie, it's fraud, I corrected gently. Which is worse? This is insane, Patricia said, finding her voice. Richard, did you know about this? Richard's face was red with shame and anger. I knew he'd asked Eleanor for startup money. I didn't know. He trailed off, looking at David with something like horror. I didn't know it was structured this way. Because I knew you'd disapprove, David snapped. You've always been too conservative, too afraid to take real risks. This was smart business. This was fraud. Richard roared, slamming his hand on the table. You stole from this woman. You used your wife's mother as an unwitting front for your business dealings. The confrontation I'd been building toward was happening, but watching it unfold was more devastating than I'd anticipated. Emma was crying quietly. Sarah looked broken. David's mask had finally slipped, revealing the calculating manipulator underneath. But I wasn't done yet. Because the financial fraud was only part of the story. The money, I said quietly, is actually not the worst part of what you've done to me. Everyone looked at me, confused. The worst part is what you've done to my relationship with Emma. I turned to look at my granddaughter, who was watching me with tears streaming down her face. For 10 years, I've been the primary financial supporter of your childhood. Every dance lesson, piano lesson, summer camp, school expense, birthday party, and Christmas present. Thousands of hours of childcare, thousands of dollars in expenses. I pulled out my notebooks, 3 volumes of careful record-keeping. I documented everything, not because I wanted to be repaid, but because I wanted to remember. Every moment with you was precious to me, Emma. Every dollar I spent on you was an investment in your happiness. Mom, please, Sarah tried to interrupt, but I held up my hand. But your parents turned my love into something shameful. They told you I was excessive, that my generosity was unhealthy. They limited our time together and taught you to feel guilty for accepting anything from me. All while they were stealing from me to fund their lifestyle and taking credit for opportunities one made possible. I looked directly at David now, and I let him see the full force of my anger. You've been criticizing my contributions to Emma's life for years. Telling me I spoil her too much, that I need to respect boundaries, that my involvement is unhealthy. My voice dropped to something cold and hard. So at this year's Christmas party, I want to hear you explain those criticisms again. I want you to tell me, in front of your parents and your daughter, that I'm not providing enough. That I'm not doing enough for this family. David's face was pale. He knew the trap I'd laid, but he'd walked right into it. That's not what I... Because you did say something interesting at last year's party, I continued, my voice deadly calm. You said I would never be up to the standard your mother set. Do you remember that, David? Patricia looked confused. I don't understand what. Let me refresh your memory, I said, pulling out my phone. I'd recorded last year's Christmas dinner, and I'd kept the audio file specifically for this moment. I pressed play. David's voice came through clearly. She tries, but honestly, she'll never be up to the woman my mother is. Some people just don't have that level of class. The room erupted. Patricia looked horrified. Richard looked disgusted. Sarah was crying harder now. But I wasn't finished. I stood up, pushing my chair back with a scraping sound that silenced everyone. You're right, David. I'll never be up to the woman your mother is. Your mother sees Emma once a month and buys her one nice gift on her birthday. She takes her on one vacation a year and teaches her about etiquette. She contributes maybe $5,000 annually to Emma's life. I walked around the table until I was standing directly behind David's chair. You're not even up to the woman my mother is. I heard the words from last year's party echo in my mind as I prepared to deliver the line that would change everything. I shifted my chair back and leaned down to speak directly into David's ear, loud enough for everyone to hear. Then she can start paying your rent. The silence was deafening. David froze. Sarah's crying stopped abruptly. Emma looked confused. Rent. Sarah whispered, her face going from white to grey. What rent? I straightened up and walked back to my seat, enjoying the moment of revelation that was about to unfold. The rent on your house, I said calmly, pulling out another document from my folder. The beautiful 4-bedroom colonial you've been living in for the past 8 years. The one you told everyone you purchased as a sign of your business success. I slid the mortgage deed across the table to Sarah. Her hands shook as she picked it up. I own your house, I said simply. Have owned it since you moved in. David came to me 8 years ago saying you needed a loan for the down payment. $40,000. But what he actually did was have me purchase the house outright, then structured a fake rental agreement that made it look like you were paying me back while actually just paying me rent. Sarah stared at the document like it was written in a foreign language. That's impossible. We've been making mortgage payments. Rent payments, I corrected. To me. Your landlord. The woman your husband just insulted for not being up to his mother's standards. Emma's voice was small and broken. Mommy and Daddy don't own our house. No, sweetheart. I do. Just like I own their restaurants, their cars, both vehicles are leased under my name, and most of their business equipment. I let that sink in for a moment before delivering the final blow. Your parents have been living off my money for 10 years while convincing you, and themselves, that they were successful entrepreneurs. Every luxury you've enjoyed, every vacation, every expensive gift, every privilege you've experienced has been funded by the grandmother they taught you to see as excessive and inappropriate. Oh my God, Patricia breathed. She was looking at David like she'd never seen him before. What have you done? I built a successful business. David shouted, standing up so violently his chair fell backward. I worked my ass off to make those restaurants profitable. The ownership structure doesn't change that. The ownership structure is fraud, Richard said flatly. And the fact that you're trying to justify it makes it worse. David whirled on his father. You're going to lecture me about business ethics. You cut corners your whole career. You taught me that success matters more than... I never taught you to steal from family, Richard interrupted, his voice shaking with rage. I never taught you to manipulate and lie to the mother of your wife. This is beyond anything I ever... Enough, I said, and something in my voice made everyone stop talking. I didn't invite you all here tonight to watch a family meltdown, though I admit this is more satisfying than I anticipated. I pulled out the final document, the one my lawyer had prepared yesterday. I invited you here to make an offer. David, Sarah, you have two choices. Option 1, I call the police and my lawyer, and we prosecute this fraud to the fullest extent of the law. You'll lose everything, including custody of Emma while you're in prison. Sarah let out a sob. Emma was crying again, and my heart broke for her, but this needed to be said. Option 2, you sign over all business operations to me, immediately and completely. I become the active owner and operator of all properties in my name. You continue to work at the restaurants, but as my employees, at salaries I determine. All profits from the businesses go to me, and I will use them to repay myself for 10 years of fraud and to establish a trust fund for Emma's future. You can't do this, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. I absolutely can. And I will. Because unlike you, I actually do own these properties. The law is entirely on my side. I looked directly at Sarah now. You have 48 hours to make your choice. Option 1 or option 2. But either way, the free ride is over. I stood up and walked to Emma's chair, kneeling down beside her. I love you, sweetheart. More than anything in this world. None of this was your fault, and none of this changes how I feel about you. But you need to know the truth about how your family's lifestyle has been funded, and about who the people in your life really are. Emma threw her arms around my neck, sobbing into my shoulder. I'm sorry, Grandma Ellie. I'm so sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for, my darling girl. Nothing at all. I looked up at the devastated faces around my dining room table. My table, in my house, purchased with my money. Merry Christmas, I said quietly. I'll expect your decision by December 27th. Now I think it's time for everyone to leave. They left in stunned silence, a family shattered by truths that had been building for a decade. Only Emma looked back at me from the doorway, her face full of confusion and heartbreak. After they were gone, I sat alone in my dining room, surrounded by the ruins of Christmas dinner and the carefully arranged evidence of my family's betrayal. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The clock Robert had bought me for our 5th anniversary, before he died, before any of this began. I'd won. I'd exposed their fraud and reclaimed my power. I'd spoken the truth that had been suffocating me for years. So why did victory taste so much like ash? The call came at 3 in the morning on December 27th, 48 hours after the Christmas confrontation. It was Sarah, her voice hoarse from crying. We'll sign, she whispered. We'll sign whatever you want. Just please don't take Emma from us. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. In the 2 days since Christmas dinner, I'd barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emma's devastated face, heard her broken apology, felt her arms around my neck as her world fell apart. I never said I was taking Emma, I replied quietly. I said you might lose custody if you went to prison. That's not the same thing. But you're taking everything else. Our business, our house, our income. How are we supposed to raise Emma with nothing? The same way I raised you after your father died, I said, and I couldn't keep the hardness out of my voice. With love, sacrifice, and actual honesty. Silence on the other end. Then, I'm sorry, Mom. For all of it. I knew what David was doing wasn't right, but I told myself it was for Emma's future. I convinced myself that we deserved the life we were building. You deserved a life you earned, not one you stole. I know that now. A long pause. Emma won't stop crying. She keeps saying she always knew you loved her, but she didn't understand how much until she saw the numbers. She's been reading through your notebooks, Mom. All those years of records. She wants to know why we made you feel like your love was wrong. My own eyes filled with tears. Put her on the phone. Rustling sounds, then Emma's voice, thick with emotion, "Grandma Ellie." "Hi, sweetheart. I'm sorry I believed them when they said you were too much. I'm sorry I pulled away from you. I'm sorry I didn't question why you couldn't come to my birthday party or why they acted weird whenever you offered to help." The words tumbled out in a rush. I'm old enough to have asked questions, but I didn't because it was easier not to. You were a child, Emma. This was never your responsibility to figure out. But I'm not a little kid anymore. I should have noticed that things didn't add up. All those times you bought me things and Mommy said she and Daddy provided them. All those visits that got cancelled. The way Daddy talked about you when you weren't there. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He was so mean about you, Grandma. And I just let it happen. Emma, listen to me. You are not responsible for your parents' choices. You're not responsible for the lies they told or the way they manipulated our relationship. The only thing I want you to remember is that I have loved you every single day of your life, and I will continue loving you no matter what happens next. Are you going to make us homeless? Mommy's afraid we're going to end up on the street. I closed my eyes, thinking about the decision I'd been wrestling with for 2 days. Revenge had felt righteous in the moment, but watching Emma's pain made it feel hollow. No, sweetheart. You're not going to be homeless. Really? Hope flooded her voice. But things are going to change. Your parents are going to start living within their means, which means your lifestyle is going to look different. No more luxury cars or expensive vacations. No more pretending to be wealthier than you actually are. I don't care about any of that stuff, Emma said fiercely. I just want my family back. The real family, without all the lies. Then that's what we're going to build. But your parents need to earn back the trust they destroyed, and that's going to take time. I spent the next hour on the phone with Emma and Sarah, negotiating the terms of their new reality. David, notably, was not part of the conversation. Sarah said he'd locked himself in his office and wouldn't come out. The agreement we reached was this: I would maintain ownership of all properties and businesses. David and Sarah would continue operating the restaurants, but as my employees with fair salaries, generous enough to support their family comfortably but not enough to fund the luxury lifestyle they'd been living. All profits beyond their salaries would go to me until I'd been repaid for every dollar of fraud, plus interest. Their house, my house, would remain in my name, but they could continue living there, paying fair market rent that would actually go toward eventual ownership. When they'd paid off the full value of the house through rent payments, I would sign it over to them. It would take 20 years, but it was possible. But there was one non-negotiable condition: full transparency, always. Every financial decision would be discussed with me. Every business expense would be approved by me. And most importantly, Emma would know the truth about our family's financial arrangements. No more secrets. No more lies designed to protect their pride at the expense of reality. I'll also be establishing a trust fund for Emma, I told Sarah. Using the profits from the businesses. It will be substantial enough to pay for her college, graduate school if she wants it, and a down payment on her first home. But she won't have access to it until she's 25, and only if she completes her education. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because unlike you and David, I actually do put Emma's future first. Not my pride, not my lifestyle, not my reputation. Her actual future. The paperwork was signed on December 30th, in my lawyer's office. David looked like he'd aged 10 years, his confident swagger completely gone. Sarah couldn't meet my eyes. But when it was done, when they'd officially become my employees and tenants instead of fraudulent business owners, I felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't satisfaction, exactly. It was more like the first deep breath after years of suffocation. The months that followed were strange and painful. David and Sarah sold their luxury cars and bought practical used vehicles. They cancelled their country club membership and expensive subscriptions. They started living the way normal people live, budgeting, planning, making sacrifices for their daughter's needs instead of expecting someone else to fund them. Emma spent every Saturday with me, helping me understand the restaurant business I now officially operated. She was bright and curious, asking questions about profit margins and employee management and customer relations. Sometimes I caught glimpses of who she might become, a young woman who understood the value of hard work, who appreciated what she had instead of always wanting more. Patricia Thompson never spoke to me again. She couldn't reconcile the reality of her son's fraud with the image of family success she'd cultivated. Richard, however, called me every few weeks to apologize and to check on Emma. He'd established his own college fund for her, separate from mine, and he made sure she knew that some family members could be trusted to keep their promises. David remained distant and resentful, fulfilling his duties at the restaurants but never fully accepting that his deception had consequences. But Sarah slowly began to transform. Working as my employee instead of pretending to be my equal made her face the reality of what they'd done to me. She started coming to my house in the evenings, after Emma was in bed, to talk. "I don't know how I became this person," she said one night, sitting at my kitchen table where she'd done homework as a child. "I don't know when I stopped being your daughter and became David's accomplice." "It happened gradually," I told her. "That's how these things always happen. Small compromises that seem reasonable in the moment, until suddenly you're so far from your values you don't recognize yourself anymore. Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" I considered the question carefully. I think forgiveness is a process, not a moment. I love you, Sarah. I always will. But trusting you again? That's going to take time. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll take whatever time you'll give me. I just want my mom back." "Then be someone worth having back," I said gently. "Not for me, but for Emma. She's watching how you handle this. She's learning from your choices whether people can grow and change after they've done wrong." Over the next 2 years, Sarah did change. She started taking night classes in business ethics and financial management, not because I required it, but because she wanted to understand how far she'd strayed from the person she'd meant to be. She volunteered at a local women's shelter, working with women who'd been financially abused by partners. She slowly rebuilt her integrity through action instead of words. Emma flourished. Without the pressure of maintaining an artificial lifestyle, she became more authentic, more grounded. She started a blog about financial literacy for teens, writing honestly about what she'd learned from our family's experience. She interviewed me about building my duplex rental business, about surviving as a young widow, about the choices that had shaped my life. "Grandma Ellie," she said one afternoon when she was 13, "do you regret exposing everything at Christmas dinner?" I thought about it carefully. I regret the pain it caused you. But I don't regret speaking the truth. Sometimes truth is the only thing that can cut through years of deception. "I'm glad you did it," she said quietly. "It hurt, but it was like setting a broken bone. It has to hurt to heal properly, right?" "That's exactly right, sweetheart." By the time Emma turned 15, the restaurant businesses had repaid most of what David and Sarah had taken from me through fraud. I was 6 to 9 years old, and for the first time in decades, I was financially secure. I could retire from nursing knowing my future was protected. I could breathe without wondering if I'd lose my house. But more importantly, I'd reclaimed my dignity. I was no longer the silent, grateful grandmother who accepted manipulation as love. I was the woman who'd built something real, who'd demanded accountability, who'd chosen truth over comfortable lies. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, you know by now that revenge isn't really about punishing people who've wronged you. It's about refusing to participate in your own diminishment. It's about saying, no more, even when saying it costs you relationships you desperately wanted to preserve. I look back now on that Christmas dinner, that moment when I pushed back my chair and said, "Then she can start paying your rent," and I see it as the moment I finally chose myself. Not selfishly, but with the clear-eyed recognition that loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. Emma graduated high school last year with a full scholarship to college. She's studying business and ethics, planning to help other families navigate complicated financial relationships. She calls me every Sunday morning, not because she has to, but because she wants to. The easy intimacy we once shared has been rebuilt on a foundation of honesty instead of obligation. Sarah and I have rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully. She's earned back most of my trust through years of consistent honesty and genuine change. David and I maintain a civil relationship for Emma's sake, though we'll never be close. He still hasn't fully accepted responsibility for what he did, but is no longer in a position to hurt me. The restaurants are thriving under my management. I hired a business manager to handle day-to-day operations, but I meet with her weekly to review decisions. I've raised employee wages, improved benefits, and created a profit-sharing program. The businesses are more successful now than they ever were under David's management, because I value the people who work for me instead of seeing them as tools for my personal enrichment. Next month, I turn 71. I'm retiring completely, selling the restaurant properties to a local business consortium. The profit will fund my retirement, finish paying for Emma's college, and establish a scholarship program for other young widows trying to build financial security. Sarah and David will have their house signed over to them fully next year, 5 years ahead of schedule, because they've paid every rent payment on time and proven they can manage their finances responsibly. They'll own something real, finally, instead of pretending to own things they'd stolen. And me? I'm going to travel. I'm going to spend time with Emma. I'm going to live the life I postponed for decades while I sacrificed everything for a family that was using me. If there's a lesson in all of this, and I hope there is, for those of you watching from wherever you're watching in this world, it's this: generosity without boundaries becomes exploitation. Love without truth becomes manipulation. And silence about injustice makes you complicit in your own victimization. I loved my daughter and granddaughter enough to fund their lives for 10 years. But I loved myself enough to demand honesty when I discovered the truth. Both kinds of love were necessary. One without the other would have destroyed me. So speak your truth. Set your boundaries. Choose yourself, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. Because sometimes the only way to save your family is to blow it up first and rebuild it on honest foundations. And if you've made it this far in my story, thank you for listening. Thank you for witnessing my pain, my anger, my revenge, and ultimately, my healing. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and check the description box below for more stories like this one. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to choose yourself. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and whether you've ever had to choose truth over comfortable lies. Because we all have a choice, every single day, about whether we'll participate in our own diminishment or stand up and say, no more. I chose no more. And I've never regretted it for a single day.